Welcome to this session. I'm going to talk about how we might need to trade some things off in the Agile perspective when we are scaling from a few teams to maybe even hundreds of teams. So who am I? My name is Håkan Forss. I'm a lean and agile coach working with lots of different organizations, usually quite large organizations nowadays, helping them to get flow in their product development. And if you haven't understood it yet, I'm a huge Lego fan, but Lego has in no way endorsed or sponsored this presentation. My wife is the executive producer, and she says that I might not need more Lego bricks at home. So, have you ever been in a situation where you have a pile of work on your desk and you can just sit there and work and you feel so efficient? Hands up. Yeah? Awesome. So, a little bit of shake of a head, never happened. No, maybe not. Maybe even your boss comes up or your teammate says, "Good work, I see you're a good worker here." I absolutely have experienced this. But if we then take a step back and we look at as an organization, maybe a team of teams, an agile release train, 100 agile release trains as a company. And it's not uncommon that we see that everyone is busy, working really, really hard in an organization, but it seems to take forever to actually get the product out the door. Anyone experience this? Yeah, a few? So I'm going to talk today a little bit of what might be the reason for this and how we might do some trade-offs to mitigate this. But I will start off telling you a story. This is how do you call it? It's a true story or inspired by real events, and we try to hide the guilty ones for their sanity. So we had two test teams. In this case, it's like a number of teams that produce software, and then they have specialized test teams that help them to test and verify their software. And we're going to follow them of testing a feature. So in this case, they load the feature into their custom hardware. So they need to do some preparation of this. And this is a yellow brick. And why is it a yellow brick? Well, it's actually not bringing on a value to just load the software in. We are not testing yet, right? So we want to test. So when the software is loaded in, we start doing some testing. And unfortunately, we discover a bug or a problem. So we need to write a Jira ticket to the support team, tell them what's the problem. We spend some time doing that. And as we all know, the support team or the dev team, they are very busy, so they come back when they have some time. As a tester then, I switch over to loading in the next feature, the next branch instead, and start testing on that because I want to keep busy. And while I'm doing that, the support team comes back and they say, well, we need some more error logs so we can understand a little bit more what this problem is. And you say, no problem at all. Let me just finish testing this feature and I will set it up and I can send you that. So you finish up setting it up, do some testing, and unfortunately there's some challenges here as well. You write a bug report, send it off, and while you're doing that, you switch back to the first feature again, loading in, sending off the information, and waiting for the test team to come back. You switch back to the second feature, and while you're doing that, the support team comes back with a fix. So you finish up the testing here, and extracting the information that they need. Switch back again to, let's see, I'm watching the wrong slides here maybe. So you switch back, setting the final one up with a fix. It's finished. You need to switch back and finish up the second feature. Is this something that you can relate to? Has this ever happened to you in your software development lives? Yeah, I see a few hands. Good. Or not that good, maybe. So this is a very common pattern in most organizations. You have this ping pong game of sending tickets in between each other, and there's a lot of waiting. And this is based on a true situation. And what we did in that organization, we tried something different to see if this would help. So in comes the Kata team. What they did, do the same thing. They set up the test environment, start to load in the software. We find the problem when we do the testing. And when the problem occurs, instead of just sending a ticket off, we just signal to the support team, we have a problem. I'm going to wait for you to come back, and we're going to look at this together. And while they were doing this, they called in a coach, and they started looking at how they can do process improvements and so on, waiting for the support team. So the support team comes back, and because everything is loaded in, we can look at the logs, we can have a dialogue, problem solving together. So the support team says, well, we need to spend some time to fix this. So while they're doing this, you actually just bring in the coach to do some additional process improvement. And as soon as the support team comes back with a fix, because the environment is up and running, you can load the software in immediately, and we can finish that feature. And we can see the same pattern repeat again for the second feature. Has anyone tried out working like this? We have a few, yeah? What's your experience? Better? How does it feel being in the Kata team, sitting there waiting? Can be frustrating. I think I saw a hand over here as well. Sorry? More control, yeah? And it delivered more if that's, yeah. So if we see here in the picture, we can see that the second feature here was delivered basically at the same time as the first feature in the top example. And of course, the first feature here was delivered much earlier. So depending on your context of what your business context is, this might be super valuable to get things out earlier. And we also deliver both of them a little bit faster in the second time. But this is a trade-off, because you can feel frustrated, and if you have someone else judging you if you are working or not, they might perceive that you're actually not that productive. So here's a quote from Donald Reinhardt. He's the guru in product development flow. And he says, in product development, our greatest waste is not unproductive engineers, but work sitting idle in process queues. Do we get paid if engineers is working? Only if you're a consulting gig, right? You get paid when the product delivers. So from a company perspective, what we really want to do is to get the product out the door. So this is the efficiency trade-off. How many of you read Niklas Modig's book, This is Lean? A few of you, yeah? Great book, quite old now, but still very good. And he talks about the productivity paradox, or the efficiency paradox, where we have resource efficiency and we have flow efficiency. And resource efficiency is keeping people, machines, maybe an office space, whatever, occupied. So the more resource efficient you are, the more they are utilized, up to 100%. And flow efficiency is how long does it take, or how much weight is there in a process from when a customer have a need until you fulfill that need. And we could say in the BCB example, we could definitely see that they are trying to optimize towards resource efficiency, keeping the tester and the test environment busy all the time. And when you observe this, if you could observe it, which is sometimes really hard in knowledge work, right? You could see piles of work waiting in between the different teams or the workers, because otherwise you run the risk of these workers running out of work. If we, on the other hand, look at the Kata example, they are trying to optimize for flow of the work. How do we minimize the number of waiting time that we have for the work itself? And here, if you would observe the work, if you can do it, you would see that there are usually no queues of work in between the different steps. And the work flows from one step in the process or from one team or a team member without any delay. And this is the lean and the agile trade-off, where we want to optimize towards flow first before we try to optimize for resource efficiency. So let's dive into the next topic. And it is more of a broader topic rather than maybe a trade-off. Systems thinking. What is systems thinking? Well, systems thinking is thinking about if you try to optimize all the parts, you run a big risk of sub-optimizing the big system. So, and if you optimize for the big system, you're most likely going to have some parts in that system that it is not fully optimized. So how can we use systems thinking in this perspective? Well, what are we trying to optimize for? When we are talking about, especially when we are scaling Agile in an organization, we should not focus so much on you as an individual in terms of looking at efficiency. As an individual, you should look at optimizing for your team. So as a team, you look at how we can work together to be as efficient as possible. However, also as a team, you need to look one step out. What is the Agile release train if you're using a SAFe framework? We should try to, as a team, optimize for delivery in the Agile release train over being efficient in the team. And if you have multiple Agile release trains within a portfolio, all these Agile release trains should try to optimize to get the delivery of the portfolio as fast as possible. And if you have multiple portfolios, looking at the company. So systems thinking in this context is really about looking at the bigger picture and optimizing one step out all the time. If you, on the other hand, try to optimize for yourself or for your own team and don't look at the things outside, you will most likely see that we are worse off, especially from a flow perspective as a larger organization. So I'm more of a Kanban continuous flow guy than a Scrum guy, but they can work really well together. So my examples here would be a little bit more towards the Kanban continuous flow rather than the Scrum, but there's really no difference. So a system of work, we're working with stories. We're working with stories in teams. Yeah. Stories and subtasks and so on. And that might have a more detailed kind of workflow described here, or you might have the kind of the classic things to do, doing, and done. The key thing here for me when scaling things up is to see that these things are in a bigger context. So our stories are part of a feature flow. So when you build feature stories, they are part of a feature. So when we're optimizing of delivering stories, if we take the system thinking approach, what should we look for? Should we optimize for delivering stories or the features? One step out, right? So try to deliver one feature at a time rather than just continue working on stories. And the same thing if you're working in a larger context that you might have epics. A feature is part of an epic. So when you're trying to work on features, try to finish all the features in one epic rather than just keep working on features. And of course, when you scale this, it might look more like this. You have multiple streams of stories, you have multiple streams of features, and you might have multiple streams of epics. So how do we actually get this to work as one system? Well, the key is to see this as one connected system and apply WIP limits on all levels throughout the system. So here I was lazy, so you can see that we repeat the same WIP limit all over the place. But of course, these will be adjusted based on how it works in the specific teams and so on. But the full idea here is when we work on the features, so if we have 5 features up here, that will translate to a number of stories in these teams. So these stories here should mainly be connected to the features up here. If they're not, we're running the risk of not optimizing to deliver the value for the company. So what happens then if you set the WIP limit and as a team member, you're eager to do more work. So all my work is done. We are at our WIP limit, so we can't get any more work in. What should I do today as an engineer? Well, can you help someone else to finish some work? Can you unblock some work? Maybe go and pair program with someone in a technology they haven't used before to learn something new. But if none of those things is possible, I've used something that I call the golden ticket. And what are the golden tickets? Well, these are work that the team themselves can define, team members self can define that they want to do to improve or think that is helping the product along. And these tickets you can work on as long as you're willing to drop them as soon as high priority work is available for you to work on, even if that has a cost. So what could be an example of this, maybe not in software? Well, think about a typical fire station, or maybe this is just how we think fire stations works. But the firemen are at the fire station, and what do they do when there's not a fire? Exercise, play innebandy, hurt themselves, cleaning gear, doing training, maintenance, all that stuff. What happens if they are in the kitchen and they are cooking the most perfect dinner and the alarm bell goes off? They drop everything, right? Even if it's a mess in the kitchen, and they will spend hours cleaning up when they come back. Because it's a higher priority to put out the fire. So here is the same thing in knowledge work. What we want to do is to create these work that we can do, but we can immediately drop them. So when I worked with a game development team, everyone in the game team had ideas of how to improve the game, but we had to produce the game. So when you're not able to help someone else, you could work on these things. So if you're an artist, you might do some additional art or improve some of the artwork that you're not so happy with. If you are a coder, you do some refactoring, you do some improvement, maybe some performance enhancement, and so on and so on. But as soon as the rest of the team needs you to work on the priority work, you drop the golden ticket. Let's move on. So how do we actually see this system? So if anyone here worked in manufacturing, in a manufacturing plant, yeah? Have you ever worked in logistics, maybe in a where you can kind of transfer goods and so on? Yeah, a few of you. It's quite easy to see the inventory moving around, right? Or in a manufacturing plant, you can see stuff moving in the production line. In knowledge work, that is almost impossible because everything is hidden in our computers. And we don't know what you are actually working on and how much is waiting in that Jira in basket if you don't look at it. So a very powerful way is to start to visualize the work. Try to make it tangible. The more tangible you can make it in a physical space, the more easy it is to relate to it as something that is important. That's just how human psychology works. So this, of course, assumes that we are working in a more or less in the office together at the same time. It is much more powerful to do it together in one place and working close together. If you need to do it remotely, just think about how do we create the same feeling where everyone is remote. Maybe we have our visualization up on part of our screen all day, or we have a separate screen in our home office showing us the board and so on. But the key thing here is we want to see not just what we are working on as individuals or teams, we want to see the big picture. Because otherwise we are basically playing strut football. Have you played strut football? A few of you? How was the experience?
A lot of accidents.
A lot of accidents, yeah? How easy was it to find the goal?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Even harder to find the ball.
Exactly. So basically, when you play strut ball or cone football, you look through a cone, and you're only allowed to look through that to play football. So, okay, here we see the football. That's usually not the case. But the feet here, are they our opponent's feet or the teammates? Where is the goal? So what we want to do with our visualization is to kind of take away the cone, looking at the bigger picture, to visualize the bigger system. So you don't just have individual teams visualized. So a simplified Lego version here. So maybe we bring together that big epic feature view together somewhere and we show it. Here's a more concrete example. This is this wall here represents the work of roughly 2,500 people. So in this room, they visualized everything that was important and the status of them. And most of the meetings around how we deliver and how we progress was held in this meeting room. So you always can see what's happening. Love your deviations. Have you heard this expression before? No? So this is an expression that I've heard first at Scania. And they talked about we love our deviations. Whatever is not going according to plan is awesome. In the perspective, we have an opportunity to actually improve. So loving your deviations, seeing the things that are not as they should and stand out is really good. So collect and visualize your blockers, when things are going wrong, your bugs and so on. So if you have a team board, might look like this. When you run your daily meetings, or when you run your Scrum of Scrum meetings for a big Agile release train, don't focus on the work. So here I circled some of the things that is, according to this visualization, would be work. Instead, what we want to do is to focus on what is standing still, what work is not currently being worked on for any reason. And it might be that they are blocked, or there's a bug, something like that. Or it will be that they're just sitting around in queues, waiting for being worked on. So that can be your main focus in your meetings and your stand-ups and so on, rather than looking at the work itself. So if you're running daily meetings, which I recommend at least once per day, maybe 2 or 3 of the ones in the weeks will be fully focused on this perspective, and the other ones will be more the traditional one, looking at what have I completed, what should I work on today, and so on. So you can mix them, but don't forget to have this focus at least a couple of times a week. And when you remove one of these blockers, don't throw them away, because these blockers are gold. So here is an example where we took all the blockers and we wrote the start date and an end date when it was resolved. And then we moved them to this board. And the categories here are the reasons for why work was standing still. And we just then put the different stickers here to build simple Pareto diagram, where we have the highest closest to left, and then the lowest category to the right. And this is a very easy way to visualize where do we have the biggest problem, at least in number of occurrences. Where should we put our focus to do process improvement? And that might be these here. And of course, another team said to me, well, we have a lot of occurrences of a certain type of blockers, but they don't take that much time. So therefore, we want to spend more on the things that generates the most waiting time. So what we did then was just to separate the distance between the tickets here would represent the number of hours or days. And then you can see what is the highest one in terms of hours. So a very simple way to do it. And if you do this in an electronic system, it's very easy to do this as well. But all these blockers and impediments are really the gold and the gemstones of how we can improve our way of working. So tracking this information is super, super valuable if you want to improve your system. Let's dive into the cadence and synchronization trade-off. We had a discussion here before we kicked off. What do I mean with cadence and synchronization? Well, if you let all the teams in your organization decide their own iteration length and when they start and when they finish, you can get really good and efficient teams because it works for them, right? If we then step back and I talk about systems thinking, what's the potential problem of doing this? We are optimizing for the individual teams rather than for maybe the Agile release train they're part of or the bigger portfolio. And if we can see here, if we're going to deliver something together, we will see that there might be gaps here in terms of when things will be finished. So one way to try out in your organization is to try to actually have the iterations when people cooperate to be the same length and in synchronization. Because this will help in terms of communication and planning together and talking to each other, because the same type of events will happen at the same time. You will know people will be available for discussions around planning, doing delivery, and so on and so on. And as a big organization, this can have huge benefits if we also align this in terms of if we have the teams here, and every quarter we might align the different Agile release trains, and maybe once a year we also align the whole organization around our business plans to make sure that everyone is in sync, knowing what is the right thing to work on. And the last thing I'm going to dive into here sorry, is dependencies. And just like when I was born into doing the actual coding myself, dependencies can cause a lot of problems. Let me just take another sip here. So, what we want to do from a bigger organization's perspective is to try to avoid using component or technology teams. Oh my God. Let's see if I can clear my throat a little fast here. What's the challenge with having component technology teams? Well, they might be very good and efficient as component or technology teams, but when we need to combine these components or technologies to a complete product, we will typically have a lot of handovers. And these handovers will then create a lot of weight and synchronization problems. So what we're trying to do is to create feature teams. And these feature teams should be as much as possible end-to-end. So think if you're going to build a solution and think of it as a hamburger. What you want to do is to compose teams that can take a bite through the whole hamburger. Because then you can taste at least a little bit of how that whole system will work, and you will make sure that you can actually try all of it. And the downside, of course, of this is if you have like a large technology stack, so a hamburger with lots of different layers, you might need a lot of different competences to make this work. So to optimize for delivering products in a large organization, you might want to try to build a little bit bigger feature teams. And when I talk about bigger, what I've seen to work is up to even 20 people in one team. And this goes kind of against the grain for a lot of other team-oriented setups and how we build a good team. So then you have to kind of look at what is the trade-off here. Is the team and the perfect kind of setup in terms of teams and individuals, or our ability to deliver features as an organization? And finding the right balance for your setup. If you can't go away with your dependencies in between the different teams or between the different parts of the organization, I highly recommend you to use visualizations such as this. This is from the SAFe framework called a program board. And basically here, all the blue things are features, and the red things here are dependencies to those features. And what we want to use this visualization for is, in the best situation, we don't want to have any lines on this board. But in most cases, when you are a large organization, you will have them. So the first reflective action is to see, can we remove them by reorganizing ourselves in the teams or the work? Or if you can't, start to manage these dependencies. So during PI planning or some similar type of planning events, build this board. And then when you run at least once a week, look at the board. And this will be where today is. So everything that is on to the left of that line should be done. Or we run the risk of the things that we're connecting to be late. So this is a powerful way of looking at how we as a larger organization is working, by also looking at the smaller parts. So everything to the left of the line here that is done is good. But if we move a little bit further forward here, and we see that a few of them is actually not being delivered in time, we have an early indication to the things that we are connected to will also be late. And how can we then focus and make sure that we are delivering those things in time? Sorry? So the idea here, if the best thing is if a team could take these blue things here are features, if they could take the feature end to end themselves without any handovers. And then you wouldn't have any red lines here. So that's another point. You don't have to, in my book, but you need to visualize when you're doing the dependent work. So from a flow perspective, it's very easy to misinterpret the PI boundaries in SAFe, that you have to kind of start everything right after PI planning, and then you have to finish before the next PI planning. But that's actually not how it's intended. It's just a planning event. So every 12 weeks or so, you plan, but you deliver continuously. Otherwise, you have the risk of actually working in a very batch fashion, which means that everyone that is involved in the beginning will be super busy in the beginning. Everyone that is involved at the end of a feature, verification and so on, they will be super busy there. And you will blame the ones in test and verification for everything being late, even if you give them like a traffic jam in the end. So
What happens if like only a few teams are doing Agile? Because it's like this complex teams, they don't work.
So if you do switch over, so the question was if we have a few teams that are not agile and some are others are agile. I think what has really worked from my perspective is, as an organization, we at least agree, there we go, on these interaction points. So you basically build an API for when you communicate in terms of planning. So maybe the project-oriented part, we check in with them once a quarter, or maybe even once a year. But we have an agreed cadence of when we check in and synchronize our plans. And of course, if you want to be really responsive as an organization, moving down to maybe every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks is preferred compared to doing it once a quarter. So just quickly wrapping up, and then I'm open for questions. So here's another one of my favorite quotes from W. Edwards Deming. A bad system will beat a good person every time. And what he really wants to say with this is, if you are a part of a management team or part of the organization where you're looking at how the organization is running, don't look for bad performers in terms of individuals. Look at how have we set up the system so someone can perform bad? How have we set up the organization so we allow bad results to happen rather than looking at the individuals? If we're building a really good system where people can do the right thing and it's designed to give us the right results, then we can start to focus on the individuals themselves. But start with building a good system where people can operate to get the right results. And the trade-offs and looking at the things to do this, in my book, is try to optimize for flow efficiency first. Looking at system thinking, always optimize one step out. Realize that this is one connected system and apply WIP limits throughout. Visualize the work. Looking at your blockers rather than the work. And build end-to-end feature teams. For me, these are the trade-offs that will help you to get Agile to work in scale. And with that, we are at the end. Do we have any more questions or reflections? Or tomatoes? Yes.
You talked about how to prioritize what process improvements to do.
Yep. So how did you optimize for?
If you try to optimize the flow, how do you prioritize the actual process improvement?
What I've tried, throw me out when we are when the next speaker is due to set up here. But the idea here is if you group these, so the assumption that we did in the simpler one is, so all of these are reasons for things standing still. So if we would address this category, we will get rid of, in this case, almost 50% of the reasons for why work is standing still. And standing still is the worst thing in terms of flow. So our assumption in that case was that if we address those, we will get a lot of bang for the buck. And sometimes you might not be able to address this one. This might be an external dependency or something like that. So then you kind of just walk in this direction and you keep working on it, on the ones that has the most here. And eventually you will get to the tail here, or you're strong enough to address something that you couldn't before. And what the team I mentioned, instead of occurrences, we use time. So this is the thing that delayed us the most. And that way we categorized instead. But they come up later and we can discuss if I can give you some more tips. Yes?
If you needed 100 people to cover the end-to-end feature,
Yep.
strategy should you apply?
Then you probably need to break things down into teams. And those individual teams then have to have that bigger goal in mind and visualize that. That should be in their face all the time. So if you really look at things in this perspective, and you have all the teams, you have multiple teams here working. If you set a very low WIP limit here on the bigger things that you're going to work on, and you're not allowing new work to come to the next level here, before you have finished the bigger thing here, you can provide this focus for the whole organization of what to actually work on. And you're minimizing the risk of the different hundreds of people going in vastly different directions and not actually delivering on the bigger thing. So it can really help if you do it that way. And you really need to have WIP limits on all the steps here, because otherwise you can start to push in work, hidden work in the system without seeing it. Yes?
Have you tried this and joined this with OKR?
OKRs, the same thing. It works exactly the same thing. You really want to limit the number of OKRs that you have as well, and it works exactly the same way. And we had some wordly mapping kind of things, really cool. You can connect them. My favorite alternative to OKRs is 4 disciplines of execution. Adds a little bit more focus on the execution part, not just setting the goals.
I notice very often that you have like fancy stuff like very deeply connected to the architecture, like you need this API to build a content, the API is to connect with
Yep.
How do you see this team setup connected to architecture? Because for me it feels like architecture and team setup
Yep.
deeply related.
There's something called the Conway's Law. How you set up your organization will be reflected in your software and vice versa. So if you want to optimize for flow, you need to design your architecture for flow. So typically you want to reduce hard dependencies, be very vigilant building good APIs that don't leak, and using kind of the solid principles from Uncle Bob of how you build good architecture. And there's a book I think it's called something like Agile Software Development C# something from Uncle Bob. It's an awesome book of how you build good software for flow. Any other questions? Yep.
Yeah, I was trying to implement the DevOps in a team like 8-9 years ago in a company that I got PTSD from it.
Okay.
It was like, oh, for real. The problem was that there were all people working from other companies. They were working the same way as they used, like the friends. They still work like they usually do.
Yep.
There was only one team doing Agile.
Mm.
And the whole organization was trying to not do it. And I mean, it's really hard to get around the culture that all already there. I mean,
Indeed.
you have companies that you
Indeed.
still have the same culture.
Yep. And what I can tell you, my experience for working with large organization, if you want to transition into a more agile way of working, lean agile way of working, you need the top management to buy in. And they need to change their behavior as part of this transition. And it usually need to be before the teams change. Otherwise, you will not succeed. That's just the hard truth. I've been burned so many times, so I know. Yeah.
Every question. So we got some of the teams who want to agile work.
Yep.
Some of them maybe they see it, no, it doesn't work.
Mm.
So the question is, what's the things that make the agile coach special or different through your experiences?
Yeah. So what makes the agile coach special if people have different experience and so on? So I think the core concept, or the most winning concepts I've seen from my own experience, and when I've seen others to do it, is as a coach, don't assume that you have the right answer. Let people try. Give them a goal and let them try for themselves. So an example, we had a team of expert testers, and we said, now we're going to take all of you testers and we're going to build cross-functional test teams. We tried it, didn't work. It made it even worse. So what we then did was to actually switch back, and we ran individual specialized teams, but we managed the work coming into the teams super strict. So the team that was the slowest was the pace setters for everyone else. That was not what I thought from the beginning would be the right answer, but we tried it. So set the goal of what you want to achieve, what is better for the organization, and let people experiment and find it out themselves. And as a coach, giving them examples to try out if they don't know what to try.
Protect them when they're wrong.
Absolutely. So, do you know this, guys? Fail is not an English word, right? It's an acronym. First attempt in learning. Thank you. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be kicked off the stage now.